This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today. We've got a great first hour here. We've got Sonny Bunch coming up talking about entertainment. Tarzana Joe gives us one of his great poems here in this hour. Plus, we're going to talk about the debt ceiling deal, the vote, the politics behind it. We're also going to talk about what happened to Joe Biden at the Air Force Academy commencement, and much, much more coming up in this hour.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel. portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Hope you had a great first week of unofficial summer. Ed Morrissey is here to fill in my 3 days off. Ed Morrissey, of course, editor-in-chief of Hot Air and co-conspirator with Dwayne on the Friday After Show. Take it away, Ed, and thank you.
Thank you, Hugh Hewitt. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com coming to you from deep in the heart of Texas today. I have shocking news for everybody. Shocking, I say. The Senate passed the debt ceiling adjustment bill last night, 63-36, an outcome that literally no one would have predicted except everybody who pays attention in politics. I mean, this was a sort of a master class of political theater this week. The debt ceiling deal was a tactical win for Republicans. It was not a strategic win, but it was a tactical win for Republicans. This was a deal that Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer absolutely refused to make for 97 days. Playing chicken with the debt ceiling date, which was always a little bit ambiguous, but the latest edition of that date was, I believe, June 5th. So Monday was the date by which the Treasury was going to have to stop paying some of the bills because it didn't have enough appropriated cash in its coffers. No one thought that that was going to happen. No one thought that we were going to get there. And Dwayne and I were even talking about this a week ago. Dwayne, you and I were talking about this on our podcast. And what did we say in the morning that day? We said
we figured it would happen tomorrow, right? Or no?
Well, yeah. No. We figured it was going to happen that night. We were off by 24 hours.
Yeah,
right?
It was when we did the podcast. We figured it would be the next day, but it ended up being that night. It
right.
was.
They held off on putting out the deal until a holiday weekend rolled around where people aren't paying attention to the news. We thought that they would bury it in like a Friday night, document dump type of situation. And they waited until Saturday night.
But we also both knew it wasn't going to be that close. I think I put the over/under at 300 in the House, and I put the over/under at 65 in the Senate. Turned out it was 314 in the House, and I think the Senate vote ended up being 63.
63, yeah, 63. And again, there's plenty of room here. I mean, this is the whole thing is this grand sort of theater. And what amuses me most is that people. And by the way, when I say people, I'm not talking about Hugh Hewitt listeners because they're smart. They know this stuff already. I'm talking about reporters who apparently have never gone through a budget cycle, who are writing these hyperbolic things. We're coming up on, we're approaching the cliff. Catastrophe ahead. Will they get together? I mean, Politico, which should know better, had, I think it was on Tuesday, right? Tuesday or Wednesday, they had this headline. It says, can Kevin McCarthy pull this deal off? This deal was pulled off on Saturday night.
Yes.
It was actually pulled off a couple of weeks before that when Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer finally caved and said, all right, we'll negotiate terms with you. Because
somewhere along the way, wasn't there a story that Janet Yellen forgot to carry the one? And oh, by the way, we've got till Tuesday anyway.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It was. Yeah. It's theater. It's theater. As soon as Joe Biden agreed to sit down with Kevin McCarthy and go over the bill that the House passed. And bear in mind, the only reason why this happened at all was because Kevin McCarthy got that debt ceiling increase passed in the House of Representatives to start with, which gave him all of the leverage.
It boxed in the Democrats. It boxed in Joe Biden.
Them in. They miscalculated. They underestimated McCarthy's ability to pull that bill through a very thin majority. So they did agree to sit down and negotiate. The bill ended up rolling back some of the cuts that Republicans had put in the original debt ceiling increase bill, but that's the nature of negotiations when you control one chamber of Congress and the opposite party controls the other chamber plus the White House.
And it at least sets up a path for 12 clean appropriation bills.
It does. And that was actually one of the things that was the hang-up in the Senate yesterday.
Right.
Because that actually has teeth. That provision actually has teeth, and Mitch McConnell insisted on making sure that it passed the way it was in the House.
Of course, because that's actually writing the checks. That's not just making the promises. That's actually cutting the checks.
Yes, and so what they had to do is they this was sort of remarkable. They signed a joint statement I don't know, it was about 7:30 Eastern time, maybe 8 o'clock Eastern time. I was just tracking it on Twitter by that point in time because I knew that was good. By the time they said, well, we're waiving all the rules and we're going to have a bunch of votes tonight, I was like, yeah, okay, it's done. By the time I do this show tomorrow, it will be over with. And sure enough, I woke up this morning, it was. But they had to sign a joint statement saying that they were going to both work to, I forget how it was put, but basically to keep their members from gumming up the works on appropriations bills. That they were going to try to limit or eliminate objections, frivolous objections which obstruct these appropriation bills, because according to this agreement, and this agreement is binding in this session of Congress. It's binding in this session of Congress, not binding after that.
Right.
If they don't pass the 12 appropriation bills, all 12 appropriation bills on time, then at some point you just revert back to the previous year's spending levels minus 1%. And that's nominal, not inflation adjusted, which means
is a haircut that everybody's got skin in the game, right?
Yeah, because it applies to defense, it applies to SNAP, it applies to all of these programs. It applies to the FBI. Probably Republicans wouldn't mind it so much these days at the FBI.
All the social programs.
All the social programs. Well, I don't know that it doesn't impact the entitlement programs because that's statutory spending, not discretionary. But other than that, yeah, it applies across the board, and nobody's going to be happy with that. So it does force a return to at least a semblance of regular order, which is a good thing. And it gets us back to, at least in one budget cycle, maybe two, it gets us back to doing things normally through committees, which means that you're going to have less of this backroom bill writing thing that's been going on for the last several years, and omnibus and cromnibus bills and all that sort of thing should not take place now under this budget agreement, under this debt ceiling agreement. Now, there's been a lot of people who've been complaining that it doesn't go far enough, and I agree, right? I agree. I mean, we didn't get everything that we wanted out of this, and
I'm not even sure we got half of what we wanted.
Yeah,
but again, try winning elections.
You got to win more elections. There's no doubt about that. If we won control of the Senate, we would have been in better position to do some of this. If we had not lost the White House, we may have been doing some of this. I mean, let's face it, in the 4 years where the 2 years where Republicans controlled everything, we actually didn't do much better on budgeting than what we were doing after that either. It's going to take both winning elections and having a renewed sense of discipline about these matters. And at least this starts a process to where you can get to there. Whether or not we follow through on it is of course, another matter. I still think that you don't take a tactical win like this, and frankly, a rank humiliation to the president, who spent, again, 97 days saying, I'm not gonna.
How many
it's like negotiating with terrorists.
How many times did Corinne Jean-Pierre from the White House podium, press room, say we don't negotiate, we don't deal with hostage takers?
Hostage takers. A budget negotiation is suddenly a hostage situation, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
It was an untenable position. Everybody in that town knew it was an untenable position, and guess what? It was.
Well, it's an untenable position because, at least in the beginning, they were playing this out to try to force the issue in the House of Representatives because nobody thought that Kevin McCarthy could get that bill passed. That was really the trigger. Kevin McCarthy getting that bill passed.
He held the majority together, and they got it done.
So we've spent about 8 minutes talking about something that we all knew was going to happen. Let's talk about something that we also all knew that was going to happen, which was what happened with Joe Biden yesterday. We got a couple of minutes in this segment.
Yeah, talk we must, right?
I mean this might come up with one of our guests later on in the show too.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure it will.
That was disturbing. I mean, it's one thing to stumble on stairs. But in your 80, it's still a big deal if you're stumbling on stairs. This was just walking across the stage.
If you're watching on the Salem News Channel, we should play the video of it.
We should, and I mean, we only have one president at a time. So whether or not you like Joe Biden or not, he's still the president of the United States. So when you see things like this, it's extremely concerning. I'll just go ahead and keep talking while we're getting that cut ready.
Let's play cut number one, Jacob.
But
here is the president at the Air Force Academy commencement yesterday. Go ahead and play it, Jacob.
We'll just get a few minutes of this. So first off, he looks lost, and he
stayed down for a while.
Well, I mean, that's probably a smart move. I mean, when you fall like that and you're 80 years old, you wait for somebody to help you get up. I mean, he looked okay after that, but honestly,
if you're watching that, whether you agree with his policies or don't agree with his policies, the first flash you have is we just came that close to Kamala Harris.
And that has repercussions for 2024. That clip is going to have repercussions for 2024 as well. We'll come back. We might talk a little bit more about that. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at HughHewitt.com.
By the way, I met with who are those guys that fly over shortly? You heard of them, haven't you? 3 of them are women. So don't screw around, guys.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today. As we head toward the weekend, I want to update you on the great progress of Salem's annual Angel Tree Camp Drive. Thanks to people just like you, our network-wide total of donations is enough to send over 1,000 children of prisoners into the fresh air and Christian fellowship of Angel Tree Camp. But many others are still waiting and hoping. And as Gary from Angel Tree Camp tells us, those kids will not only have fun, their lives will be transformed.
Don't we all know that if we don't have hope, we have nothing? And these kids need to have that hope. And that's why these programs all over are so important, that people support them. The big figure they always throw out, that 70% of these kids will become incarcerated when they're adults. And I think it's important on us to look at that and say, can we break that cycle?
Memorial Day weekend was the official start of summer, but for many children of prisoners, summertime means being trapped in a hot city surrounded by dangers like gangs and drugs, unless you and I help break that cycle. A gift of just $200 from you, less than dinner out and a movie for most of us, can literally transform a child's life for eternity. Let's turn around the lives of boys and girls by sending them to Angel Tree Camp this summer. Your gift sends a deserving boy or girl to camp for an entire week. Just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Angel Tree Camp banner, or you can phone your donation to 888-206-2764. That's 888-206-2764. It's a safe place for children of prisoners to experience the great outdoors, make new friends, and many kids at Angel Tree Camp step forward to receive Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Once more, just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Angel Tree Camp banner to help change a child's life today. Now, we were talking about Joe Biden's fall. And, first off, as I was saying earlier, we only have one president of the United States. And whether or not you voted for him, whether or not you like him, whether or not you think he's worthy of the office or not, we still only have one president of the United States. And we certainly hope and pray that Joe Biden didn't get seriously injured. Yesterday, the White House is saying, oh, no, he's fine, he's fine, he's fine. I'm not necessarily sure that we'd hear otherwise anyway. But this is concerning. This is an 80-year-old man who keeps stumbling, keeps falling, keeps looking lost on stage, which he did a little bit right before that. And this is the only candidate that Democrats are going to consider for the nomination in 2024. That's over a year. This election is a year and a half away, right? Or just it's 17 months away. And he'll be 17 months older than he is right now, looking the way he is. And, hopefully he won't have any more falls like that. But I don't know that we can count on that.
At 80 years old, today is his best day going forward.
Right. Yes. I mean, that's it's the most reliably best day that he's got going forward. And this is a real issue. And it's not just the presidency. There's a lot of very old people in Washington, D.C. with power and authority who probably shouldn't be there. And it's not necessarily just age either. I mean, we've been talking about John Fetterman in the U.S. Senate. Dianne Feinstein looks terrible. But the difference between, the Feinstein and Fetterman is that there's 100 people in that chamber, right? I mean, they can be backstopped, and it's not like that. There's not a long tradition of backstopping people like that, Dwayne. It happened with Strom Thurmond. It happened with Robert Byrd and others previous to this. You only have, again, this is my point, you only got one president of the United States.
When Joe Biden does that on stage, how does Vladimir Putin react to that?
How does Xi
Jinping react to that?
Right.
How does Kim Jong-un react to that?
How does NATO react to that? I mean, that's just as much of a concern. I mean,
yes.
I mean, look, it's not like somebody's going to start a war just because this guy fell on stage, and that's not what we're arguing.
But what calculations are made if Joe Biden is perceived to be that feeble?
Because all of the executive authority is in his hands. There is no backstop here. And so that's what's concerning about this. Not so much, I mean, you made the joke about President Kamala Harris. I mean, that's pretty concerning for other reasons. But, I mean, Democrats have to be looking at 2024 and saying, we really have to have a plan B here. And it can't be Kamala Harris because she's terrible at this. I think that you're going to see some sort of Eugene McCarthy moment here coming up in the next few months, where you get and I don't think it's going to be RFK Jr.
I don't think it is either.
But it's going to be somebody who steps up and makes Biden look bad in Iowa or New Hampshire.
There's three or four from the governor ranks that Democrats could spin up in a hurry if they had to.
That's absolutely right. Coming back, we'll be talking with Sonny Bunch about the entertainment that is facing you this weekend. I'm Ed Morrissey. We'll be right back.
Ed will be right back. I do not want any of you to go anywhere. I have taken my ReliefFactor.com with me to Reunion Land, because all they do is walk from one cocktail party to another. It really is right out of a Doonesbury cartoon. But I took my ReliefFactor.com with me, and I'm hoping you will remember to take yours as well. When you go on vacation this summer, when you take a couple of days off, when you decide to do anything new, take your ReliefFactor.com with you. $19.95 gets you started. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. They are the 4 natural supplements that make up ReliefFactor.com, and I take it every day, and I take it everywhere. There's one simple reason. I want to keep moving. I want to keep going faster than pretty much everyone else around here, and that means do it every day. And if you're going to do it every day, you're going to get minor aches and pains. You got to be exercising. You're going to get older today. That's why you need ReliefFactor.com. You should be starting the first. It is summer. You're definitely doing the latter, because that's just father time. Go get your ReliefFactor.com and fight back, and then come back for more of Ed Morrissey.
Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show, where disco lives forever. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, always digging the bumper music here when I guest host. Joining me now is Sonny Bunch, movie critic from the Bulwark, at Sonny Bunch on Twitter, and also a big disco aficionado. Sonny, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. How dare you suggest I'm the only disco I like is The Last Days of Disco, the Whit Stillman movie. Great movie.
Very good movie. Yes, an excellent movie. And great cast, great ensemble. Really an interesting story too. I think it's something that people probably missed. But I mean, you've got Kate Beckinsale, you've got Chloe Sevigny, you've got a number of really great character actors in that. I enjoy that movie very much, even though it does tend to make fun a little bit of the disco era, which of course I'm so fond of, Sonny. But that is the entertainment of yesterday. I noticed that you've written a very long piece about Succession sticking the landing with its wrap up, and I have to open this discussion up with a struggle session admission. I've never watched Succession. I never saw the show.
I did not write that. So that was a piece by Zandy Hartig.
Gotcha. Okay, my apologies. Yeah,
but no, it's fine. I did not watch Succession either. So I have been out of the loop on Succession. It's funny, my wife and I watched the first episode and weren't that into it and just kind of stopped and never were able to get back into it. But I was a big fan of Barry, which also wrapped up this week.
Barry wrapped up this week, and Mrs. Maisel wrapped up this week. When I've seen an episode or two of Barry, I didn't get into it. I was very much into the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which I think also stuck the landing on its finale. I think it was actually one of the better finales I've seen wrapping up a show after sort of a strange fifth season that seemed to be very much into time travel for some reason. There was so many flashbacks and flash forwards that you really kind of needed a scorecard to figure out where you were at in some episodes. But I thought the finale was excellent.
Yes. So Mrs. Maisel again. I think we watched the first 2 seasons of that, and then just kind of stopped because it wasn't. We weren't that into the third season.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing about the new age of TV. The viewership is so fractured. People don't watch everything, and so what else? The other show that finished up this week. There are a lot of finales this week. A lot of series finales this week.
Yeah.
Ted Lasso also finished up. So, I mean, it's been an interesting couple of days here. But I mean, it's the audiences on all these shows are pretty small. Marvelous Miss Maisel was barely on the Nielsen streaming ratings this year. Ted Lasso is the biggest hit for Apple, and it's still probably only watched by 4 or 5 million, households, people, whatever.
That's amazing.
The Succession finale was watched live by 3 million people. When you get into streaming numbers and that sort of thing, it's probably up to like 7 or 8 million total. But still, that's 2% of the population or so. Like it's and Barry was watched by nobody basically. I think Barry was watched. I think had 700,000 live, and then a couple million after live plus 3. So it's an interesting fractured time out there. For what it's worth, my favorite of these was Barry. Of the two of the 4 that I watched, I think that show is great. And it's the rarest thing in our world. It's a half-hour comedy that stayed a half-hour comedy the whole way through. This is the weird thing about Ted Lasso. That show started as a half-hour comedy, and then this last season, every episode was like 70 minutes long. It was endless. It was interminable. I mean, it just kept going. So.
Okay,
anyway.
So Sonny, we got the weekend coming up. What are we looking at for entertainment this weekend? The cinema or in the streaming services? What's on your radar?
Sure. So the big release this weekend is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. It's the animated sequel to the 2018 movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It's all about again, multiverses. We're still doing the multiverse thing.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that.
I like Into the Spider-Verse. Okay, I thought it was pretty good. But Across the Spider-Verse, so it's hard to describe exactly what this movie looks like because it looks like everything. So Across the Spider-Verse is the most interesting animated film I've seen in a very, very long time. It is aping every animation style that you can think of. And kind of throwing all of them into a blender and hitting mix and going crazy, going to town with it. It's so different from the Pixar's very competent but now kind of staid and boring 3D CGI stuff. It's very different from the Illumination style, which is the Minions or Super Mario Brothers movie. Like there's that studio has a very distinct style. And it's different even than DreamWorks. DreamWorks has been, actually one of the more interesting animation studios recently. The look of Puss in Boots and the bad guys, had this kind of had an almost like it looked like a flat animated picture brought to life in 3D. Almost is the easiest way to describe it, with this sort of cell shading technique. It was those movies look good and interesting, and again different, which is just nice. Animation has been in kind of a rut recently for the last 15 years or so. Again, thanks to Pixar's kind of domination, Pixar and Illumination's domination. But this Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is wild. I mean, it looks unlike anything I have seen in a long time. And as a pure audio visual experience, one of the most fascinating movies I have seen in years. I want to warn people though, it's one half of a movie. They are not advertising this as a part one of two, but it is very much a part one of two. It ends on a cliffhanger. Almost. Do you remember seeing Dune in theaters a couple years back?
I didn't see it in theaters, and I regret it because I saw it almost as soon as it came onto streaming, and I was really blown away by it. And I have a pretty nice setup at home, right? But I was thinking the entire time, man, I wish I'd watched this one in the cinema because it had to have been amazing in the cinema. But yes, I was just thinking the same thing. Dune is exactly the same thing. It ends on basically in the middle of a story. Nothing's resolved.
Yeah, I mean, so Dune, another movie that was an absolute amazing movie to see in theaters, an absolute audio-visual experience. I saw that movie in IMAX. I think I saw that movie in IMAX twice. Wow. And it really was something else. I remember also this came out mid-2021, so we're kind of in the middle of the pandemic still, or at least at the tail end of the pandemic. People haven't quite gone back to the theaters yet, and it was that was pretty wild. And this is kind of the same thing again, a really interesting audiovisual experience, but it really does just stop in the at the very least Dune really did feel like it stopped in the middle of a scene. This at least kind of has a cliffhanger ending where it's like, oh, what's going to happen to our friend Spider-Man and his amazing friends? So we'll see how audiences deal with that. I think this movie is going to be huge. By the way, I mean I went to a press screening, and it was half press, half public, and I have not felt energy like that for a movie in a long time. People were hyped. They were very hyped for it.
I was reading in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was a few weeks ago, about the multiverse, that the studios were dumping the whole multiverse thing. I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once had just won awards, right? Which I thought was a really interesting, and I really enjoyed that movie. A really interesting way to employ a multiverse sort of approach, but apparently the multiverse was not paying off. So are you surprised? I mean, this was obviously produced before those decisions might have been made. Do you think that that this is just a case of maybe it just wasn't being done well before, and maybe audiences are still going to respond to this, or do you think that this has really been played out? Maybe this is just the last of the last gasp of this genre.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because look, at least in the world of comic book movies, they have run into the same problem that comic books themselves ran into in the 80s and 90s and early aughts, frankly up through till today. I think I don't read comic books anymore, but I get the sense that the same thing is basically going on, which is that when you have all of the multiverse stuff, it gets very confusing for audiences.
Yeah.
But also B, it really lowers and removes the stakes, because when you have the multiverse, you can just say, well, he's still alive over here. Maybe this character died here, but he's still alive over here, so it's not that big a deal. And that's a problem for audiences and for just the drama of film.
Well, Sonny Bunch, thanks so much for being with us. At Sonny Bunch on Twitter. He's at the Bulwark. When we come back, Tarzana Joe joins us. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. We'll be right back.
Don't go anywhere. Ed will be right back. What I want you to remember, though, is that Birch Gold is a sponsor of the show and has been for many years because they have supremely excellent customer service, lots of 5-star reviews. Customer service for what? For when you want to set up an IRA, a 401k, or a SEP IRA that will grow tax-free for any increase in value that it accrues over the next many years of your retirement. You have to do it with a third-party intermediary. That means you've got to find something that is reliable, that has its own depository, that puts your gold into a little box marked with your name on it, and it stays there. So you buy your gold from Birch Gold, and they put it in that physical depository, and that's where it sits until you take it out, hopefully 30, 40, 50 years ago. You might even leave it to your kids and your grandkids when you finally go. But to get started, go get the free information kit via HughGold.com or text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 989898. That's HughGold.com or text Hugh to 989898 and come back for more of Ed Morrissey.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition. Go to myphdweightloss.com to learn more.
Joined now by the Poet Laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, even though Hugh is away and Ed Morrissey and I are filling in. We are joined for a bit of verse for the week by Tarzana Joe, who you can read all of his fine work at tarzanajoe.com. Hello, Joe. How are you?
Hello, Dwayne.
What do you have for us this week as June commences?
A message of gloom, which in California, June gloom is the thing, but the sun does shine through at the end. So hang in there for me. In looking at the headlines for a theme on which to speak, it struck me that a pattern was apparent during the week. The confident consumer had his optimism shattered, but that's thus one of many things appearing sad and tattered. San Francisco's broken. I'm sorry, but it is. The streets there now resemble the finale of Les Mis. A war in Europe rages, and the president just rambles. Both parties are divided, and the FBI's in shambles. They fractured female athletes, and because they couldn't resist, they even added apple pie and baseball to the list. But before you get despondent from the words that I've just spoken, think about kintsugi. There's beauty in the broken, a Japanese philosophy that artists have long shared, which holds that there's a greater grace in things that are repaired. It shows that there's a value and instills a sense of pride when something's resurrected and not merely put aside. We have our work cut out for us in times so woke and weak, when unless you're well protected, it's hard to stand and speak. The work may be impossible, or dangerous, or boring, but we had a fragile beauty, and it's surely worth restoring. That's Broken, or Kintsugi, by Tarzana Joe.
You know what I think you've just done? Whoever the nominee is, and we're Switzerland. We're not playing favorites here. Whoever the nominee happens to be, you've just created the bumper sticker, right? Whoever the nominee is, and whoever their vice president is, it's name/name. Make America Kintsugi again.
Kintsugi again. Yeah. So I think it's apparent to people that something's seriously wrong here, and cities aren't working, and the FBI's working at something, but things need to be fixed, and they can be fixed, and they come back even better.
I wholeheartly agree, and I appreciate the long road of pessimism leading to the optimistic hope at the end. That verse is going to be available at tarzanajoe.com, I assume.
Absolutely.
And what kind of poem entries are you getting for solicitations for verse? What kind of season are we in now? Are we into wedding season?
And Father of the Bride, they couldn't think of anything, and the wedding's next weekend season.
Aha! So it's on the fly poetry season. You have to do rapid response poetry. I take it.
Actually, I have a SWAT team ready to go at all times.
But you, of course, will take you will take things for Labor Day now at Tarzana Joe at Reagan.com, correct?
I might want to take a little vacation this summer. Well, maybe this winter too. But yes, I'm ready and willing and able, pen in hand.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Back to you, Ed.
So, Dwayne, I mean, first off, that's hilarious. I love Tarzana Joe.
Make America Kintsugi again.
Make America Kintsugi again. I want that bumper sticker. That's awesome. I wanted to follow up with you on how you're doing with the myphdweightloss.com program.
Doing really well. It took me about 12 weeks to lose 50 pounds. I've kept it off for about the last 4.5 months. myphdweightloss.com still has a nutritionist that I follow up with, kind of a loose follow-up now. I'm far enough along that they kind of know I can kind of behave myself, but they keep checking in with me, which is a good thing to do, especially with a lot of the crazy stuff we see. Popcorn is not on the myphdweightloss.com diet, but boy, is popcorn tempting when you see a lot of the stuff that we're seeing video-wise.
Well, yeah, I mean, the follow-up is really one of the big benefits of a structured program like myPhDweightloss.com, right? I mean, this is it's very easy to start rationalizing away choices.
You can lose the weight, and then you can put on a couple pounds and say, well, but that's okay. And then you gain another couple of pounds, and you start talking your way back in, and before you know it, you're 10 pounds heavier than when you started.
Yep.
That doesn't happen with myPhDweightloss.com. 864-644-1900, by the way, is the best way to get a hold of them. 864-644-1900.
Or myPhDweightloss.com.
Or myPhDweightloss.com.
Just go right there. And from a guy who's done the yo-yo thing, I can tell you, yeah, that type of structure is probably really beneficial. So
I was at dinner last night with my wife, and a picture of me was on her home screen, and she showed it to me, and it's like, I was really chubby then. She says, I didn't notice you were chubby at the time, but boy, are you skinny now. It does work.
It's better to have it go that direction than the other direction. I'll just say that with pictures, and I've had it both directions.
Indeed.
All right. Dwayne Generalissimo Patterson, thank you so much for that update. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Stay tuned for the next hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
It's Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com filling in for Hugh today. We have a great hour coming up. We've got Ben Domenech from The Spectator. We're going to talk about the politics of the day. Cam Edwards joins me to talk about gun rights. We're going to talk about what happened in Bruin and why that might apply to Hunter Biden, or not, perhaps. Sarah Bedford from the Washington Examiner drops by to give us the scoop from Capitol Hill. So stay tuned for a great hour coming up.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel. Portions of the following program may contain pre-recorded material.
Morning glory, America. Hope you had a great first week of unofficial summer. Ed Morrissey is here to fill in my 3 days off. Ed Morrissey, of course, editor-in-chief of Hot Air and co-conspirator with Dwayne on the Friday After Show. Take it away, Ed, and thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. I'm Ed Morrissey of hotair.com, and getting a good start on not just the summer, but also the 2024 Republican primary, all the news that goes along with that. And joining us now to discuss that is Ben Domenech. He's at Spectator, thespectator.com. And he's got a piece up today, or actually yesterday, excuse me, the DeSantis family Iowa hoedown. It's sort of an introduction to their podcast over there, The District, which is going to be obviously very closely following all of these. Ben, first off, you lead this off talking about Casey DeSantis being a secret weapon. You link to Politico, a report that they did a couple of days ago. Politico also sort of ran a piece about her, I think it was a week prior to that, casting her as Lady Macbeth. I mean, this was...
And I'll admit something, Ed, which is that I actually tried to get that reporter to come on my own Fox News podcast, the Ben Domenech Show, which folks can find on their podcast feed, and tried to get him to come on to defend that unsuccessfully. So I think maybe he thought better of it after the fact. It's not really good to go just roll out there and say, yeah, this person that you've never heard of, she's actually this horrible conspiratorial woman. And it's one of these things where, look, Casey DeSantis, I mean, clearly is having an outsized role already in this campaign. And I think that part of that is due to the fact that, the DeSantises, in terms of their political approach, have been very insular. They have a small group of people around them who they clearly trust and rely on. And clearly the wife in this case, Casey, is a major advisor to Ron. And one of the things that I would think is, we've gone through in the last several years, experiencing the Trump White House and the way that they worked. And the upside of having an insular group is that you don't have the kind of backstabbing, the kind of leaking, the kind of, just chaos that we saw from the Trump White House over and over again during his tenure there. The flip side of it, though, is that you can kind of get, a very narrow focus in terms of your various inputs, meaning that, you can have kind of a small group of people who, you become convinced that those are the only options you have. And so there's upsides and downsides to it, and we'll see the way that it plays out over the coming months in terms of what that does to the way that DeSantis approaches this election.
Well, right. I mean, you get a bubble, and I think that's what we're talking about is avoiding being trapped in bubbles. And when you only have a very small insular inner circle, and that's the only people that you're getting input from, that can happen. Although, as governor of a state as large as Florida, I'd have to say that it's probably less likely that would happen for somebody who's been a governor as it might be for somebody who's coming in as a complete outsider.
Yeah, and the flip side of this, of course, is that, in the Trump years, it was so fly by night, fly by the seat of your pants that it was, did Roger Stone get him on the phone in the last 15 minutes? Well, then it's a different strategy. So it's one of the things that I think you have to accept with this. And one other thing that just was so interesting about that Iowa rollout, clearly they've been paying attention to the various critiques and concerns that people had about the governor's interactions on a personal level with voters. And you may have seen the footage that came out just yesterday from Iowa, where he was glad handing with a number of different supporters, and you had an AP reporter, one who's already pretty established in terms of he's actually a former Democrat staffer, but he's as one is, once you go to the AP. But he was sort of saying to the governor, why aren't you taking questions? Why aren't you taking questions? And DeSantis responded, "Are you blind? All these people are coming up to me. They're all talking to me. It's the sort of thing that I think clearly it's gotten under their skin, the idea that he can't relate to people on that one-on-one level." And I actually think that, one of the things that we should appreciate at this point in our politics is I'm not sure how much that matters outside of these early states. but the
Right.
early states clearly do matter enormously to him. Unless he hits the ground, obviously last time around Ted Cruz won Iowa. DeSantis certainly needs to win Iowa. He needs to perform well in New Hampshire. I'm sure they think that he needs to, perform well or win in South Carolina and set up a match in Florida that is probably going to decide the whole thing in terms of the fact that it's winner take all in terms of the delegates.
Well, I agree with you, and this is the reason why I think it's important to read what the New York Times, and those are words that do not flow trippingly off my tongue, Ben Domenech, by the way. I would just want to say that. I'd much rather read the Spectator.com than the New York Times, but they did have a good piece up on what Never Back Down and the Ron DeSantis campaign are planning to do, which is to spend $200 million building a massive ground organization. They're talking about hiring 2,600 people to be on the ground, especially in battleground states, but actually in a more expansive map than that. In a way that, I wrote about this type of operation in my book from 7 years ago that literally dozens have enjoyed, Going Red, which is, a mechanism by which you make those personal contacts. And if you do it well, Barack Obama had a brilliant strategy that really Republicans, I think to this day, still don't really quite grasp. But he used that organization not just to make, the door knock and make contact, but to listen to what people are concerned about in their own communities and then recontextualize the agenda that he was running on about how it would specifically benefit those particular communities. And if that's the type of thing that Ron DeSantis is building, and I'm not necessarily sure that they've actually learned that lesson either, but at least they're building that type of organization, that flood the zone organization.
Here's the thing that is important to understand. There's so many people, and we saw this in 2022, who took the wrong lesson, I think, away from the success of Donald Trump, which is essentially to say earned media is what matters.
Right.
And if I go out there and I say things that get earned media attention, and I'm very active on social media, that can be sufficient to run a winning campaign. And what I think people have since learned is, that may work when you've got 100% name ID and you're the most prominent person in the country, and you've got a litany of background in television and entertainment and business, et cetera, as Donald Trump did. That can work. It can't work necessarily when you're just a statewide conservative Republican candidate who's trying to get attention. And I think that that's something that, a lot of candidates, unfortunately, it's the reason that they ended up losing in November is that they did not do many of the traditional things that you have to do as a candidate in order to win. And that includes, having a campaign manager, having an organization that can work well with you, knocking on doors and doing the kind of traditional politicking that has, worked for so many years in America. And I think that that's something that people need to understand. Yes, you can do some of this sort of Trumpian stuff in terms of your approach to using social media and the like, but that's not going to be enough to get you over the finish line. You have to do the traditional stuff too.
Right, and we're speaking with Ben Domenech, editor-at-large of The Spectator, thespectator.com, and this is sort of the point that I'm leading up to. I think that what the real lesson of that is that you could get away with that when you're running against a campaign that's not well organized and doesn't have a likable candidate at the top of it. Hillary Clinton was running the "It's You Owe Me" campaign in 2016 and didn't have a ground organization the way that, nothing even close to what Barack Obama had built. I was stunned that the Democrats didn't just learn that lesson again and just do it all over again. And then you had Joe Biden running a basement campaign and barely getting by in an overwhelming vote, barely getting by Donald Trump in 2020. And I think that what I'm looking at in terms of the 2024 cycle is you've got Donald Trump, who's really going to run, assuming that Never Back Down and Ron DeSantis combine up to create this kind of ground organization, you're going to see Donald Trump running against somebody who's actually a good campaigner with a really superior ground organization, which Donald Trump does not have and won't have. They just don't organize it along those lines. Well, we got about 30 seconds. I just want to get your take on that.
I think that this is going to be, I think you set it up really well, and I think that this is going to be a real contrast in styles. So we're going to have to see if DeSantis can do this the way that sort of you traditionally approach these things. But what that does is it makes all the more important that they have this organization set up in order to take advantage if he's able to put Donald Trump back on his heels in debates and in the various confrontations that we can expect that they're going to have over the coming months.
Absolutely. Ben Domenech from thespectator.com. He's also on Twitter at bdomenech. You can go check out what he's doing there as well. Thanks so much for being with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about Angel Tree Camp a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on with Dwayne. And so stay tuned. I'm Ed Morrissey of hotair.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today, coming to you live from Funky Town. I love the bumper music here, man. But on my way to Funky Town, as we head toward the weekend, I want to update you on the great progress of Salem's annual Angel Tree Camp Drive. Thanks to people just like you, our network-wide total of donations is enough to send over 1,000 children of prisoners to the fresh air and Christian fellowship of Angel Tree Camp. But many others are still waiting and hoping. And as Gary from Angel Tree Camp tells us, those kids will not only have fun, but their lives will be transformed.
Don't we all know that if we don't have hope, we have nothing? And these kids need to have that hope. And that's why these programs all over are so important, that people support them. The big figure they always throw out, that 70% of these kids will become incarcerated when they're adults. And I think it's important on us to look at that and say, can we break that cycle?
Memorial Day weekend was the official start of summer, but for many children of prisoners, summertime means being trapped in a hot city, surrounded by dangers like gangs and drugs, unless you and I help break that cycle. A gift of just $200 from you, less than dinner out and a movie for most of us, can literally transform a child's life for eternity. Let's turn around the lives of boys and girls by sending them to Angel Tree Camp this summer. Your gift sends a deserving boy or girl to camp for an entire week. Just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Angel Tree Camp banner, or you can phone your donation to 888-206-2764. That's 888-206-2764. It's a safe place for children of prisoners to experience the great outdoors, make new friends, and many kids at Angel Tree Camp can step forward to receive Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Once more, just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Angel Tree Camp banner to help change a child's life today. By the way, we want to get back to just a little bit of news here in the short time that we have in this segment. Yesterday, a judge in Florida recused himself from the Disney lawsuit against the state of Florida and Ron DeSantis. Judge Mark Walker, whose court was picked specifically because he's the chief judge, and Disney was hoping that he would grab the case himself.
Different district, different region.
Yeah, it's a
friendly judge.
Friendly judge.
If you were to look in the dictionary under judge shopping, you'd see this as the example, right?
Right, because Disney's in Orlando, which is the middle district of Florida.
Right.
And Judge Mark Walker is the chief judge in the northern district of Florida. These are federal court districts, right? Now, you can do that. It's not that you can't file that lawsuit in the northern district, even though everything that you're fighting over is in the middle district, but it's very blatant judge shopping. And Mark Walker obliged by grabbing this case before it was assigned to anybody else. He recused himself yesterday by saying, well, there's a third degree of connection because I have a relative that owns Disney stock. It's nonsense.
Kevin Bacon's not involved.
Yeah, Kevin Bacon is not involved. This is not this is like 19 degrees of Bob Iger is what the deal is here. It's nonsense. The reason why Walker is recusing himself is because it was going the DeSantis team, not even the DeSantis team, the state of Florida was going to take this to the 11th Circuit, and the 11th Circuit was going to say, "Are you nuts? You've made disparaging comments about DeSantis in court and citing Disney as a case of state retaliation. You are absolutely too biased to handle this case." And the irony of all ironies, right, or the hypocrisy of all hypocrisies, after as he's recusing himself, the New York Times has this today, says, a Florida judge disqualified himself from a court case brought by Disney against Governor Ron DeSantis because a relative owned stock in the company, but not before blasting the governor's legal team for engaging in rank judge shopping.
Wait. I think we need to help the New York Times out and write that story for him.
Yeah. First off, Disney's the one that brought the lawsuit. Disney's the one that decided to put it in the Northern District where Mark Walker was the chief
shopping.
Judge. Right, that was the judge shopping. So the case has been assigned to a Trump-appointed lawyer, still in the Northern District. I don't know if the state of Florida is still going to want to get a venue change back to the Middle District. I don't know that it's really going to make a whole lot of difference.
They care.
This is going to lose. this case is going to lose.
Disney's going to lose anyway.
The only hope that they had of winning a case against the state of Florida was if Mark Walker was the judge. And
even if they would have won that case, it still would have gotten bounced in the 11th Circuit.
Yeah, it would have been a momentary victory at best. Mark Walker is often overturned by the 11th Circuit. So, yes, I think that stay tuned for a cave from Disney, probably in the next few weeks. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Don't go anywhere. Ed will be right back. However, don't forget I'm in the ReliefFactor.com studio north, as he is in the Relief Factor studio west. And the ReliefFactor.com studio is everything that we need to bring you the day's news, but it's also the studio that we need to tell you how to feel good about the day and feel less of those minor aches and pains that come with aging and exercise. Summer is underway. Maybe you did something this weekend you hadn't done since last summer, and you're feeling a little bit. Well, that's just fine. That means it's time to double down on your ReliefFactor.com. If you went a little bit far, if you took on a little bit too many extra games of horse out in the driveway with the kids and they beat you like they always do, well, ReliefFactor.com will at least take away the pain, the physical pain. You're not going to get over the emotional pain of getting beaten by your teenagers. But ReliefFactor.com is for your body. The minor aches and pains that come with playing hoops if you hadn't played hoops in a long time. $19.95 gets you started. Icarian curcumin, resveratrol, omega in every single packet. ReliefFactor.com, and then come back for more of Ed Morrissey.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at HughHewitt.com.
Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show, where disco lives forever. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Joining me now is my friend, my partner on our VIP Gold podcast on Wednesday afternoons, I should say, at both BearingArms.com and HotAir.com. Cam Edwards, the editor of BearingArms.com. Welcome back to the show, Cam.
Hey, Ed. Good morning. Thanks so much for the invite.
Well, hey, I'm glad to be talking to you. You got a great, not a great story. It's actually a bad story, but you got a very interesting story up at BearingArms.com. Tom Knighton wrote this one about a 65-year-old man who fatally shot a mugger who was threatening him and who may end up being charged with murder as a result. I mean, what is going on here in Queens?
Well, what's going on in Queens is, they're run by some folks who, A, I don't really think like our right to armed self-defense.
Right.
But B, also, are in charge of enforcing some really draconian gun laws. I'll be honest with you. After looking at the video surveillance tape that's been released, I really doubt that even Queens DA Melinda Katz is going to file murder charges. However, this guy is facing apparently at least a dozen or so illegal possession of a weapon counts because he did have, I think, 6 of his firearms were legally permitted, legally registered in New York, but he had about a dozen or so that were not. He didn't have the proper paperwork. And so as a result of this, Ed, this guy who is, legally eligible to own these firearms and in 27 states doesn't need a permit to carry in order to, bear those arms on the street in self-defense, he's now looking at, over a decade in prison unless the DA offers him some sort of plea deal on these weapons charges, on these simple possession charges.
Yeah, this is nuts. I mean, this is a guy who had to fight for his life, right? And frankly, whether or not a guy who is otherwise, legally permitted to own weapons and to use them in self-defense had the right paperwork at the time where his life was on the line, I think that's somewhat of a smaller issue here. My guess is that the guy who ended up getting shot and killed, the mugger who ended up getting shot and killed, probably didn't receive that same kind of scrutiny throughout his life. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I'm just going to take a wild guess here.
I think you're absolutely right. In fact, the family of the guy who was shot and killed says we don't blame the armed citizen. We blame the state because their relative apparently was, severely mentally ill, had been, just like Jordan Neely had sort of cycled in and out of, jails and mental facilities in New York, never getting the treatment that he needed, never getting consequences for the crimes that he committed. And so the family's angry, not at the armed citizen who they say, look, he had every right to protect himself. They're angry at the state because their relative was in desperate need of help and the state wasn't providing it.
Yeah, you mentioned, or excuse me, Tom mentions that New York is not a stand your ground state. And that under those circumstances, a state might argue that the victim had a duty to try to flee, right? Rather than confront their attacker and kill them. Again, it's tricky because a lot of people misunderstand what stand your ground laws actually do. But in the absence of them, that's also potentially a legal issue for him if they decide to charge on the homicide.
You're absolutely right. And look, I mean, what's the saying? You can indict a ham sandwich, right? So if Melinda Katz wants to try to, go after this guy on murder charges, I'm sure she can get an indictment. Whether or not she can get a conviction, I think is another story. This guy was armed with what turned out to be a pin, but in the dark alley, the 65-year-old man said, I thought it was a knife. This guy had also apparently been damaging the vestibule of a nearby apartment building. Like, he was on a bit of not a rampage, but he was disturbed. He was actively disturbed at that time.
Right.
So there, I think, are a lot of extenuating circumstances that would bolster a self-defense claim. And again, I'm not sure that the prosecutor's even going to go there when they could try to send him to prison for possessory offenses. But, again, I want to point out, Ed, this guy can legally own guns. He legally owned like 6 of the guns in his house. They're going after it because he didn't get a permission slip to own the other 14. And why on earth should that be a felony offense? For you to legally own 6 guns, but these 14 you didn't get permission for, so we're going to put you in prison for a decade. That's not common sense. That's not reasonable, but that's what modern gun control looks like.
It is what modern gun control looks like, and contrast it with the way that they treated Jordan Neely over the course of his life. I mean, Jordan Neely had abducted a child at one point. He had a string of violent offenses, and they never put him away for very long. They would just cycle him through the system and put him right back out in the street. And especially over the last few years, where these DAs who are in place, not just in New York City, all over the country these days, are doing decarceration and prosecutorial discretion, and I'm trying to think of the correct word here. It's restorative justice is the term that they use for this, and taking actually violent people and not putting them in prison for their violent acts, but they're going to go after this guy and give him 10 years for defending his life. I mean, that's absurd. That's an absurd situation, and even in New York City, you have to think that that's not going to stand. That's not going to play very well.
I suspect that you're right. But again, you hit on something that's so important when you talk about this, restorative justice nonsense. Because, again, you'll see prosecutors or judges say, look, prison's not the right place for you. You've got mental illness. We need to get you help. And so they say, well, okay, he needs to go to a hospital. The problem is in New York, the number of inpatient beds for people who are in crisis has declined by like 50% since 2009. Right. As of last year, I think they had 1,300 state-operated beds for all of New York City. That's crazy, no pun intended. And so what happens is, the criminal justice system doesn't want to deal with these individuals. The mental health system doesn't want to and can't handle these individuals. And so, again, you're seeing not only these individuals, but New Yorkers who are having to live with this vicious cycle here, where the state is not providing any sort of consequences for violent criminals, any sort of treatment for the mentally ill, and then, you're not allowed to protect yourself from those violent, dangerously ill individuals.
We're speaking with Cam Edwards from BearingArms.com. He's also on Twitter at Cam Edwards, but he's too smart to spend too much time on Twitter. He is there, though. You can find him there. That's a running gag between the two of us. I want to ask you about this, and I sent you an email on this, and we're going to debate this just a little bit. There was a story that came out in Politico and the New York Times. I think it was yesterday morning. It may have been overnight the day before, that said that Hunter Biden's attorneys are going to try to get him off the hook for his firearms violation. He lied on a application for firearms, which is perjury, about not being a drug user when he was a crack cocaine user at the time, and that's one of the charges that the Department of Justice is contemplating. And the story from the New York Times and Politico was, they're going to use Bruin to argue that it lets him off the hook and indemnifies him against that charge because it won't pass Clarence Thomas's new test. And at least both of them did point to the irony of Hunter Biden taking refuge in Bruin when his father's out there slamming it as the most radical thing ever. But I mean, honestly, I looked at that and said, Bruin doesn't have anything to do with possession. It has to do with carrying. and if you read Heller and McDonald, which are really the precedents that have to do with possession rather than carrying, both of those go way out of their way to basically reinforce the Gun Control Act of 1968, which is the provision that he would be charged under, except for the perjury part would be just perjury. But
right.
But the Gun Control Act of 1968 is what prohibits people who are drug users from possessing firearms. So I wrote this big long piece for our VIP members yesterday about how this doesn't even apply, and this looks and smells like another way to sort of tweak Clarence Thomas over Bruin when, Heller and McDonald really speak to this much more clearly. Now, you and I were kind of disagreeing a little bit about this on email.
Yeah, a little bit, because I think you're right. I mean, the Bruin case is not going to directly help Hunter Biden, but it's the Bruin test, I think, that his attorneys are now relying on. Because after the Heller decision, a lot of courts adopted this two-step sort of tiered scrutiny, interest balancing test. And in Bruin, Justice Thomas said, nope, you guys got that wrong. And we told you got it wrong back in Heller McDonald, but we're going to make it explicit for you. 2 steps is 1 step too many when you're determining whether or not a gun control law is constitutional, right? So instead, the test for determining whether or not gun laws are constitutional, and this would include the Gun Control Act, is the text, history, and tradition test. Basically, you look at the text of the Second Amendment, and then you looked to see whether or not there were historical analogs around 1791, maybe around 1868, the time the 14th Amendment was ratified, that have, again, a reasonable analog to today's gun control law. And in this case, the law would be, the prohibition on unlawful users of drugs possessing firearms. There have actually been a couple of judges already around the country who said, yeah, you know what, we can't really find those analogs. Like, there are laws, plenty of laws that say you can't drink while you have a gun, right? You can't be intoxicated.
Right. Yes.
But, you can have beer in your house, and you can own a gun. So we've actually seen one judge say that the federal prohibition on gun ownership for marijuana users is unconstitutional. Now, that's not the drug of choice for Hunter Biden, at least not at the time period in question here,
no.
Right? And I think that's going to be a much harder hill to climb for his attorneys. That every unlawful user of drugs, whether it's a drug that's been legalized in 20 states but is still illegal at the federal level, or a drug that is basically prohibited in every state of the union, plus the federal government, does that individual have the right to possess a firearm? But as you say, the underlying issue is perjury, right? And I don't think the Bruen case does change that. If you're lying on that federal form, that's going to be, I think, a bigger issue for Hunter Biden. And I don't think that the Bruen case is going to be quite the umbrella of protection that his lawyers are claiming it will be.
No, I don't think so either, but I think that this was more or less a signal to Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice. Here's a good excuse that you can use to drop this while blaming Clarence Thomas for it. And
the problem for that, though, Ed, is that it's not just Hunter Biden that they're making this argument with, right? The DOJ is arguing that the Second Amendment only applies to law-abiding citizens. And again, some judges have said, look, there's no limiting authority to that statement. That means if somebody runs a stop sign, somebody gets a traffic ticket, well, they're no longer a law-abiding citizen. Do they lose their right to keep and bear arms? So where do you draw that line? The Second Amendment talks about the right of the people, not the right of the law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms. And so this is an issue that's broader than just Hunter Biden. And DOJ is taking a very hardline approach to try to limit the Second Amendment rights to as few people as possible. And that is, I think, ultimately, that's the big question that the courts are going to have to wrestle with here.
Wow, you almost made me sympathetic to Hunter Biden. Cam, I can't do these shows with you anymore. Well, that's not true. We're going to do it again on Wednesday at 1:30 Eastern Time at hotair.com and bearingarms.com. Cam Edwards at Cam Edwards on Twitter. Coming up next, we'll be talking with Sarah Bedford about the Bannon precedent and FBI Director Christopher Wray. I'm Ed Morrissey of hotair.com. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at hughhewitt.com.
Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, and joining me right now is Sarah Bedford, investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with Christopher Wray and why Steve Bannon is a name that's coming up. And Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Christopher Wray is refusing to provide what's called an FD 1023, which apparently has some sort of allegation from a whistleblower that Joe Biden took a bribe, and that's we haven't heard that, definitively, but that's what is the rumor, right? And Wray has been dodging this for now several weeks, and James Comer from Oversight and Senator Grassley from the Judiciary Committee, he's a ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, have grown extremely frustrated. Comer is now saying that he wants to move forward with a contempt charge. Tell us a little bit about how that is proceeding and what's going on with those negotiations right now.
Yeah, right now the validity of the document is sort of besides the point. These Republicans in Congress have lost faith in FBI Director Wray, not just because he's refused to cooperate with all of their oversight requests, on this form that you mentioned, but also across a range of issues, from the targeting of parents at school board meetings to the way that some of the field offices have handled traditional Catholic parishes, for example. I mean, there's a range of issues that have raised suspicions from Republicans. They're also upset that he seems to be sort of continuing the status quo of what was a corrupt culture under former FBI Director Comey. So there's a lot of frustrations there. But on this particular document, they gave more than 3 weeks for Director Wray to give them access to this one piece of paper that they have heard from a whistleblower could contain, some pretty serious investigative leads that they want to pick up on. They want to vote to hold him in contempt of Congress, which for many years was a symbolic, maybe kind of meaningless designation that partisan committees would hit uncooperative witnesses with. But in the case of Steve Bannon, the Justice Department took that criminal referral from a committee that was investigating January 6th, and they indicted him. They prosecuted him, a jury convicted him, and he's facing a sentence of, I believe, 4 months in prison for not cooperating with the congressional committee. So that's a precedent that you will probably see Republicans lean on as they pursue this contempt referral for Wray.
Well, that's the reason why you don't like to change precedents, right? Because these things always come back around. Control of Congress always changes, and once you've set these precedents, it becomes very difficult to avoid having to employ them again. I don't think that there's a chance in Hades that Merrick Garland is going to indict Christopher Wray, but it is going to be an embarrassment if they don't pick up on this. And clearly Comer is signaling that he's really going to go to the mattresses here to make the Department of Justice look as bad as possible unless they cough up this document. Now, this document is not classified, right? I mean, it's not classified. The FBI won't say whether or not it's part of an ongoing investigation, but this is from Joe Biden's term as vice president. This is not a new allegation. This is several years old, and one can presume that the Department of Justice does not have this on the front burner at the moment, so it doesn't sound as though it's going to interfere with an ongoing investigation.
Right. I mean, part of the allegations that the House Judiciary Committee, the House Oversight Committee, some of these committees conducting oversight have received from whistleblowers, the allegations are that the FBI has slow walked for years any kind of information that it's received about the Bidens, particularly with Hunter Biden, but also potentially with Joe Biden. So, I think that the Justice Department's handling of this can sort of feed into the story that House Republicans have been telling since they took over about a Justice Department that moves aggressively against its perceived enemies and sort of runs cover for its allies. That document is just sort of one data point in the broader story that House Republicans have been trying to tell through their reports and their hearings. And so, I think it's telling the way the Justice Department has shielded this document when Republicans have pointed out time and time again, when the Russia investigation was underway, they cooperated very fully with these committees and provided enough information that lawmakers could sort of feed the media the steady diet of leaks about Donald Trump that were unflattering, that this whole idea of an ongoing investigation needing to be protected from outside interference didn't really exist in that probe. And I think Republicans can sort of point to their actions here and say it's not being handled with the same forthcoming approach.
We were speaking with Sarah Bedford from the Washington Examiner. I have a theory about this, which is that Comer and Grassley already have the FD 1023, and they've acquired it, sort of sotto voce. And what they're trying to do is establish a chain of custody so that they can actually use this openly. Have you heard? I mean, you've got about 30 seconds. Have you heard anything along those lines?
I haven't, but that would, make a lot of sense. They don't want to expose the whistleblower, so they need to get it directly from the source. That's a trick that journalists use as well, actually. It will be really interesting to see what we can learn about this document if Ray ever hands it over.
Well, and I think that it's incumbent on them to get it some other way so that, like you said, they can provide cover for the whistleblower and they can provide cover for any other sources that they might have. But I think that is certainly going to be something that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on. Sarah Bedford, Washington Examiner, thank you so much for being with us today and bringing us up to date on that. Coming up next, Hugh Hewitt's weekly conversation with Dr. Larry Arnn. Today, they're going to be talking about Winston Churchill's great contemporaries. And you know that Dr. Larry Arnn is a leading expert on Winston Churchill and his importance to modern Western culture. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com. Stay tuned.